everybody. This is the Chini Maji podcast brought to you by Impact Africa Network. This week we have the awesome pleasure of having the indefatigable Navalayo Osembo. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I say indefatigable because what you're doing is definitely challenging at a different order. I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't get fatigued easily.
Nope.
You gotta
Try.
you gotta keep those running shoes on.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, literally.
But so Navalayo is the co-founder of Enda Running or Enda Athletics.
We are just now Enda.
You're just Enda.
Yeah, we're now rebranding back to Enda. There's a whole history why we have all these different names.
And we're going to that a little bit.
no. So right now we're just Enda.
Got it.
Yes.
And Enda is leading the Kenyan takeover of the running shoe industry.
Absolutely.
It's about time.
It's about time. Not
Wow.
now, when?
Right. And this is crazy because I remember the first time when I was still living in the States, you kind of tend to look over the fence and see what's happening in the ecosystem. And I was starting to do my research about who's doing what. And one of the things that was always disappointing to me as a runner, I don't run as long and far as I used to, but still a runner. I always used to be so disappointed that there was nothing, there was no commercialization of the Kenyan running industry other than the athletes being out there and wearing Nike and all that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so that to me was very disappointing. And then lo and behold, I think maybe a month later, I came across Enda. And I'm like, holy cow, someone's actually doing this. This is crazy. Yeah. And so from right off the bat, I was like, wow, it takes guts to actually go into that space that is difficult to, it's just a hard space. I mean, and there are big players in that space. And so I'm really excited to hear the story and to kind of start with you, right? What kind of person takes on such a challenge, right? So maybe we just start with, introduce your company, what you guys do at a high level, like the, elevator pitch. And then, we talk a little bit about your background, education, where you went to school, grew up, the arc between birth, I guess, and founding Enda,
That's
right?
a big arc.
Right?
I'll try
So
to summarize it.
Just summarize it in the sense that here's where I grew up, school, whatever, and then
Okay.
your entrepreneurial journey. Were you always an entrepreneur? That type of thing.
Okay. I would say Enda is essentially a company that's bringing Kenyan running to the spotlight. It kind of came from this desire to bring back the benefits of running back to the home of running champions, if I would call that. So Kenya has historically dominated distance running. But if you look at that domination and that reputation, it hasn't really transformed into anything economic. And I think when I was looking at it, I was thinking, if you look at other countries, they, especially in the West, they have really managed to capitalize on their reputation. Like, it's not just a reputation, but it's just monetization of that reputation. But then when you come here, you realize we haven't yet done that much. And granted, there are athletes that get sponsorship and things like that, but they are like a drop in the ocean.
It doesn't scale.
No. Like, there's still so many athletes who have not made it to that level yet. So very few athletes benefit. And either way, it's still a big burden on them because they still have families and villages to support.
Right.
So you find that the actual benefit is very little. So the essence was just, how do we essentially commercialize this to a point where Kenya actually takes a position and say, since we have the best runners in the world, since from an evolution perspective, like humankind also is kind of the early origins of man is in Kenya, I think the whole concept of running has truly evolved from Kenya. And the motivation was, how do we then create something that lasts? And if you're looking at the running sphere, running shoes are like the one thing that are like runners' tools. And it just made sense to make running shoes. At that point, we didn't know how to make running shoes, but we figured out, we'll figure it out. Like, first, do we agree that we need to make running shoes? Yes. Okay, now let's go to the next step of figuring out how to make running shoes. So essentially, that's what Enda is about. We work with Kenyan athletes. The Rift Valley is our testing lab. We like to wear test and do all these kinds of things, and we also get a lot of feedback from the athletes. Our product, there's an evolution of products where you can see how we started to how it kind of went as we got feedback from the athletes. And so that's what we do at Enda.
Those running shoes,
yeah.
Cool. So I guess I can't wait to hear what was your evolution like, right? In terms of, were you always a budding entrepreneur, or was this something that inspiration struck while you're trying to go down the tried and true path of get a good education, get a good job that we are taught to?
I don't know, I feel like Kenyans are essentially entrepreneurs, right? I feel like everyone has a side hustle.
Well, is that entrepreneurship or survival? Maybe they're the same thing. I don't know.
It's the same thing. I mean, it could be survival entrepreneurship, but everybody's doing something. So I think there's a difference. I think survival is when you're kind of just doing it to make ends meet. But I think if that thing actually exceeds, I think they will move from survival to entrepreneurship. Where
are we right now, broadly speaking?
Broadly speaking, the incomes in Kenya aren't that much. So I do feel like a lot of people have to supplement their income with something else. So as a country, I'd say we're on survival mode because A, the jobs are not enough, and B, the jobs don't pay good enough. They pay you, but it's not a living wage. It's a survival wage.
And so let me ask you this on that particular topic. Those are the systemic conditions right now.
Yes.
Right. What impact does that have on the mindset of people?
It's hard, man. It's hard because how do you entrepreneurship, even for Enda, I went through a journey up to a point where I said now I'm doing it full time. And even doing it full time, for full disclosure, we haven't broken even yet. So at this particular point, there's still some self-financing that's going on. And I wouldn't be able to do that, for instance, had I not been in a position that allowed me to basically save up, right? And allow me to take this journey. How many brilliant people have brilliant ideas, but they can't really get out of the rat race? Yeah, because you're kind of just making that hamster wheel run, even though you're not moving anywhere. So I do think living wage is a fundamental part of entrepreneurship, which is why I'm always pro. I wish there was a government thing where you kind of have a scheme where people can actually, if you get your business to a certain level, then someone kind of steps in and says, okay, I'm going to pay your salary for the next 2 years. You just go figure that thing out. I think that would make a fundamental...
So that's an amazing point that you bring because, what we do at Impact Africa Network, we're a startup studio.
Yeah.
And most people, because I don't talk about this on our podcast.
Yeah.
So essentially what we do is exactly what you described. And what we focus on is emerging college graduates, right? We provide them a 12-month internship and allow them to work on projects that we think should be worked on or ideas that they might have.
Yeah.
But the idea is to put them in this environment with like-minded peers, with a support infrastructure of experienced advisors, and just this very systematic process so that for 1 year, they can just focus on projects that have the chance of becoming a startup.
Yeah, that's super, super important. Although I challenge you to make it 2 years.
No, so here's the thing. So the reason why it's 1 year is because let's not talk about what I do. Let's talk about what you do. This is not about Impact Africa Network.
We should have another podcast where he talks about what he does.
I've been thinking about having that because I've never really had the chance to do that, and I'm like, you know what? I'll invite one of you guys to come and interview me.
Yeah, happy to volunteer. Right?
But anyway, so back to kind of where did you grow up and education and arc to founding Enda, just that process, high level.
So I come from Tarbo. Tarbo is maybe, depending on how fast you're driving, maybe, let's say 20 to, I'd say 30 to 40 minutes from Eldoret town. So I come basically from a place where every time you kind of go home, the people running on the road, and also just Eldoret is it was the town. It was the town where when you're growing up, let's go to LD, In terms of schooling, I went to my forces academy. So my dad was in the military, and that was the military school back then. And after that, high school, I went to Precious Blood not too far from where we are actually. It's down the road. Right. And then after that, I studied undergraduate law, which was amazing. I always wanted to be a lawyer, so I got that opportunity. And after that, I had actually, before I started my undergrad, I had done my CPA. My brother's an accountant. So during that time, you had to wait 2 years before you enter university. These kids have no idea how grateful they should be that they just finish school and go to university.
This is interesting because I had a different guest on the podcast here, Houston Malande, and he had a very different perspective.
Yeah.
He thought that the fact that we had that gap was great for him.
Yeah.
And it allowed you to explore and expand your horizons and test different things. That's what he got out of that. You think it's not useful or beneficial?
No, I feel like it wasted my time.
Where are you trying to get to? What's the rush?
No, I think think it's putting a lot of pressure on parents who already don't have enough income, right? So there has to be that, what do I do with these kids who are home for 2 years? And then it also depends on the discipline of the child. So if you grow up in an environment where you have a lot of self-discipline, then those 2 years will be magical. And I think I was lucky to be in that environment where my brother was like, you have 2 years, you can do your CPA in 2 years, go to school, right? But then there's so many other kids I know who those 2 years were very destructive. Like they really haven't recovered from those 2 years. So it really depends on your environment. So if you have a lot of time and you're not doing anything constructive, it will really be harmful.
You know, I have a different view on how human beings, of course there's nature and nurture, right? But don't you think some of these people would have still gone down those paths even if they were tracked into the university?
No, I actually think we are elements of our environment, and that's why we have different perspectives. We can see the same thing, but you see it's that whole story about the blind people touching the elephant, and they're being asked, okay, describe an elephant, and one is like, oh, it's so thin and hairy, he touched the tail. One of them is like, it's so rough and solid, it's like a wall, he touched the side. And another one is like, it's thick and round, so he touches, and the other one is like, it's like a snake. They're all describing the same thing, but they're seeing it from different perspectives. So I think human beings are elements of what is around them and what you kind of learn as a belief.
But there's always something inside you also, right? Like if, so for example, my point being, you know, you're right. My point being that if you're the kind of person who has a certain kind of penchant or habit, or if you're gonna do some things, it doesn't matter when they happen. Maybe you can get
like the environment. I feel like the environment is very in my perspective of the elephant. And one of the things I always say while I was in the US, I lived in between this suburb where there was a clear mark between the black communities and other communities.
That's pretty much America.
I was
which town was this? Which city?
It's Englewood. So Englewood, I was like right at the border between Tenafly, which is very suburban and high income,
LA,
and
right?
then in New Jersey, and then down the road, like literally half across the railway line, it will still be like downtown Englewood, and it will be a pretty much rundown. But then you would find that there was literally a division, and you would see like the black kids would be like, you know, music blaring, guys just hanging out and stuff, and then you see the other kids and they're like tennis racket, or like there's like activity, like you would see. I could be able to kind of just try to extrapolate the features of these different kids, and I was like, there's nothing that separates them other than like a space of land.
So that's the same thing, like for example in the Bay Area, this is amazingly the stark comparison between, there's this freeway called 101. I don't know if you've been to Silicon Valley.
I was, but it was such a brief visit.
So when I got there the first time, it always stunned me because there is Palo Alto and then there's East Palo Alto. So Palo Alto is where Stanford is and where all those companies right start. Facebook started there. Everybody is there who's doing anything. Right across the freeway, literally the freeway, is East Palo Alto. And stark difference, right? Completely.
Exactly.
So I guess at the end of the day, people will rise according to their opportunities around them, or limited by those opportunities.
True. But it's the environment. What do you see?
What's available around you? There's also another thing too. Like if so, for example, like your friends who didn't take advantage of those 2 years, or they kind of succumbed to those 2 years, right? I'm wondering if it was a question of, was it that they had freedom too early also, maybe they didn't have?
I don't think so, because I have a friend who's Norwegian. At 16 she was traveling the world alone. Like she left home when she was 16, and she's like the most responsible person, and for her she doesn't understand people who just go to university and go crazy. She's like, what's this, you know? But it's perspective, so you can't really say it was freedom too early, because I've seen a lot of freedom on another perspective, but it's responsible freedom. But I think it's from an environment perspective, who is around you, right? So for me, for instance, at that point, my brother was working at KPMG, and that was the first time I entered KPMG offices, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm gonna get here. You know?
What was it about KPMG?
I don't know, it was just the environment. Like, it was kind of seeing all these professional women, like, looking so nice in their nice suits and their laptops, and like the environment, it was so different to what I was used to.
Yeah.
And I was like, if I didn't have someone to kind of channel me through that direction, I'd pretty much having the ambition of, I don't want to say that, it might be offensive, but...
Just say it. Offense is good. No.
Yeah, because I had grown up in the military, so a lot of girls, their ambition was to kind of like get married to an officer, you know, like
again, environment.
Yeah, you kind of like marry higher. So it's because the officers are like the fancy people with like the fancy houses and stuff. So I do have a lot of friends who that was their life path, but I think it's because we didn't see anything beyond the walls. Like that. So let me ask you this: that was our world.
Was there a point where that was also your aspiration?
Hell no.
No. So it wasn't really KPMG then. It was, you already had that in you. You were like, I'm not settling for this. I'm trying to find some other stuff. And then KPMG was just they're like, oh, here it is.
No, I think it's also just, I don't know. We could argue.
Let's move on.
I honestly think that environment is a key factor. Like,
it sure is. I agree with you.
But like you can argue both ways.
Right. But it works both ways. It depends also on the person, but environment is a huge deal.
Yeah, right? It is. For me, I feel like I got exposed to a lot of people very early in life who just basically were like power women that I was like, I just need to be in this space where these women are occupied.
In the military? Or?
Oh, no. So, I was going back to, so when I finished my CPA just after, like those 2 years, so I had finished my CPA. So by the time I was getting into law school, I was pretty much a CPA. And I think second year, kind of just hanging out with my brother's crowd, someone was like, I can't remember what I did. It was something I had done, and my brother mentioned it to his friend, and his friend was like, oh yeah, like, I'd like to see your CV and kind of like share it with the partner and see if like you might be an interesting person to speak with. And in short, that's how I ended up at Deloitte. And I basically interned in Deloitte like from my second year to fourth year, which I think was also very instrumental in terms of just like the people I met there were very different from my usual world, like extremely different.
It parachuted you into a whole completely different environment.
Very completely
when you had no, generally speaking, business being there, given the trajectory of where you are in your life.
Exactly. Right? So I would say Deloitte was like extremely formative in terms of just the people that I met there, the fact that the partner gave me a chance, even though I was like, I'm
a second year student.
But at least I'd done my CPA. She was like, we can kind of like do something. So I felt like that also kind of gave me now a way into the corporate world, because we were doing work with really big clients. So I was like in every corporate office, kind of just like doing one consultancy. Yeah, the exposure was amazing. And also just the fact that there was this amazing woman who was just hitting target after target after target when everybody else wasn't.
And who was this?
And this was Julie Nyangaya. She's still a partner at Deloitte, and I 100% admire her. But it was just being around that person and also just seeing what they do, and you realize that she was like very focused. She still is extremely focused, goal-oriented. What do we need to do? What do we need to achieve? How do we manage our costs? How do you do kind of like everything? So I felt like I had a chance to kind of be in that space with this person who was
inspirational.
Exactly. It's like so inspirational, and I think that was like a good step. And Deloitte just gave me access to a lot of places and a lot of people that, and that also gave me knowledge for running the business. Because then you're coming from a perspective of telling people what to do, and then now I'm like, okay, I need to tell myself what to do, because I have that background. And so from Deloitte, after I finished, I immediately joined Deloitte, and then I was doing my Kenya School of Law, KSL, for like a year. And then after some time, I left Deloitte. I worked for a startup, Bridge International Academies, briefly. Then I moved to African Guarantee Fund. At that point, I think I was just trying to figure out what do I want with my life. I started applying for grad school, and then I went to LSE for a year. Then I came back, and then after LSE, I moved to New York, working for the UN. And then, now I'm working for Enda.
How long are you? How long are those different stints? For example, obviously LSE is a year. Bridge was how long?
Like a few months.
Tell us about that.
That was startup 101 immersion. Like,
a few months. What did you think it was, and what did you find?
I think also the stark reality was coming from a very structured environment to like an environment where you're building as you go.
Right.
So A was just that I don't know, like that startup euphoria. Yeah, like there's just so much going on. But then from my perspective, I'm like, wait, this has to happen fast and this has to happen fast. But then from a growth perspective, it's more of no, like we have to
be
also
flexible.
Yeah, you have to be flexible and you have to think about the numbers. But that goes back to a previous conversation. I mean, I honestly still believe it could be part of my background, but I'm always like structure, growth. Like growth is great, but without structure, it just falls apart. But that's not to say that was Bridget's path. I think at that time, when I left Deloitte, I kind of sent my resume to like different places. So Bridge called me, and then African Guarantee called me like a few weeks later. And they were like they were Pan-African. They were looking at like financial guarantees, which was something that was very appealing. Like just, I felt like that was something that was much needed. And so I moved there for, I think it was almost like a year. I think I stayed there for a year before I went to LSE. Then I came back and I was in New York for, I think, close to 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, then I came back. Now I'm back.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so you come back.
Yeah.
And what made you come back after 4 years in New York? You know?
A lot of things actually. Some personal, some. It was just, I think, it was the right moment to come back. Like it wasn't. I was always like, should I go back? Should I not? Should I? And also that time, the work for Enda was getting to be quite a bit.
So Enda had started by the time you were.
Yeah.
So tell us. Okay. So where does Enda come into this?
Enda came in at 2015, just when I got the job in New York. Like that's when I met Weldon, my co-founder.
All right. So let's talk about that. So how did you guys meet?
We met actually at it was like an event organized by YGAP Kenya, and YGAP was essentially bringing entrepreneurs and just people in the space together. And I was basically there talking about a sports academy that I had set up in Bungoma, and talking about how just Kenya does not like take advantage of its position in the sports world. And he happened to be in the audience, and after that we just started talking, and you're like, yeah man, we need to do something, especially in this running category. Right. And at that point the conversation just moved to making shoes, and we were like, okay, do you want to make shoes? I was like, yeah. We were like, it was a very casual conversation. Then we met a week after that conversation, and the conversation just went on and on and on, and after that we just say, okay, here's the plan, this is what we're going to do to get to that particular point. And we followed the plan. We're still following the plan.
Interesting. Yeah. So you had actually done a sports academy in Bungoma?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit. What was that about?
That was actually tennis, right? And I wanted to do tennis for two reasons. One, in 2014, when I was still at LSE in London, I'm a huge tennis fan. Like I love Serena and Venus. Like I love them to death. And Wimbledon was like the closest I would ever
get to them.
I couldn't afford the tickets, but still I was in the space, and kind of just experiencing the crowded train, the euphoria in the air, the thought that, oh, maybe she might be at that hotel, because guys are like, yeah, she's at that hotel, and just that whole excitement. And then I was learning about the prize money. Like total prize money is like, I think 2017 was 34 million pounds.
Wow.
And I was like, damn it, why is a Kenyan not in this thing? You know, like it's just one of those things that like, why is Kenya not in tennis? And I did my research, and I discovered that tennis is a high entry sport. It's not like running where you just pick yourself and go. Tennis, you need the racket, you need a stringing machine, you need the right balls, you need a coach, you need all these things, and there's no way kids from here who don't have that chance are ever going to get into tennis.
Isn't it interesting how there are some things we can't access just because of the cost?
It's
like
true.
Across so many different dimensions.
And I think like that's the tragedy of our country and our continent.
Yeah.
Because you have brilliant minds with no opportunity.
Exactly.
And then you have people who are very few with lots of money, but I don't know, maybe it's fear of finding out where the money is coming from, but there's lack of creativity in the capital scene. So everybody's just building hotels and building houses that are vacant for like 2 years. And I'm like, can you imagine if they were able to lose that capital in terms of the return for 2 years, why wouldn't they be able to take that same risk? on like someone who's doing something amazing or like an idea like that.
I think that tracks back to that survival mindset, right? We have a very
the people with money are not surviving.
But they can see what survival looks like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not too far away from it, right? Again, that environment thing that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Because there is how else would you explain that, right? There's if people see
like lack of creativity
and some fear, right? Like, hey, this is safe.
Fear, yeah. I think you can classify it into two. There's like legitimate capital and like illegitimate capital.
Yeah.
So legitimate capital is hard earned. So there is a lot of fear of losing it because we don't have social networks, like social nets. So
social safety net.
Exactly. Like if you're sick, your money might as well just end at a hospital.
Right.
Like so people are scared of losing that money. And then you have the people who they have capital but not the right way. So A, you don't want to spend it too much.
You want to clean it too.
Yeah, you want to clean it. And B, you want to keep it in a bank in Switzerland. I'm always like, why making Europe rich? They're rich already. Like, do something here. But the funny thing, though, is I remember like studying about this was that the Asian tigers, there was also a lot of corruption there. Like their economy also grew as a byproduct of corruption. So it's like, why was corruption positive there and corruption not positive here?
Interesting.
But it's because the corruption there became kind of like a competition of who could build the better enterprise.
That is,
right?
You see, that is such an important point. Oh my God! You see,
Yes.
I keep saying this all the time, and this is kind of, in our view, my long-term strategy. You have to change culture to change outcomes.
Exactly.
Where people, you see, human beings are status-seeking apes.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
If status is about a Range Rover and Switzerland bank account, guess what you're going to do?
That's what everybody is going to do.
Right. But if we start saying how big is your company, how many people have you employed, that's how you get Bonam Kubwa title.
Exactly.
We'll see change.
Yeah.
And so the way I see it is like, okay, you gotta cut the line somewhere and start inculcating that thought process and those value systems in the younger generation. That's why we do a podcast. One of the reasons we do a podcast. And people, an acorn grows into what's that? Oak tree, right? And so you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so for us, that's why, in my view, I'm so stunned that you actually talked about this because I inherently kind of knew that without seeing that research, but I think everybody kind of sees that. Culture is such a powerful thing.
So our culture is very, I don't want to get too geeky, but...
No.
Yeah, like,
let's educate the world.
Frantz Fanon, in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, which I love. I love that book, but it's so tragic also because...
Which book is this again, so everybody can hear?
The Wretched of the Earth.
The Wretched of the Earth, Frantz
Fanon.
Fanon.
By Frantz Fanon. And he was just basically talking about the dangers of, like, now that we will get this newfound freedom, here's, like, the things that will be dangerous for Africa. And one of the things he talks about was the growth of the bourgeois, like the elite who is not really about seeking freedom for the people, but is about essentially just taking over the seat that the colonial master left, and that his aspirations are then not for a better Africa, but for being like his master, like, so then he's like, I want to go to Europe because that's where he went to Europe.
Oh my God.
I want to invest in a Rolls Royce because that was the status quo. And then he was like, the problem with that bourgeois class is that then they take away, like, they were the biggest danger for Africa's growth.
Biggest risk.
Exactly.
Right?
And you kind of see it unfolding because then you look at how our patterns are. It's kind of just like replace colonialists with black colonialists, and then you create the same extractive systems.
Totally.
And the systems are not, the money is not kind of coming back to be reinvested.
It's being extracted.
It's just being extracted and put.
Africa has always been an extractive, venture.
I know, which is why I'm like,
even
social enterprise has to work, like, because it's very
social enterprise might be one of the answers. I mean, I kind of tend to struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah, it has to be power policy. Who's in charge and what are they putting in place?
But the question becomes, it's chicken and egg, right? Because the policy, we've been waiting for policy to change forever, right?
And in Kenya, we do actually have a lot of laws. Just the enforcement is terrible.
So why have laws if you can't enforce them? That's the point.
Because we like the big stick. We need to tell people you're breaking the law. Anyway, that's another conversation.
That's another conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's something else around that. I think human beings, like you've talked about this.
Yeah.
We underestimate the power of culture culture, the power of narrative,
Exactly.
the power of saying what's cool and what's not cool.
Exactly.
You know, the court of public opinion, if you will.
Yeah.
That is where we don't understand the power of that, and with social media and we don't have to. We have we're talking to people right now.
Yes.
We have our own media platform.
Yeah.
We can construct the narrative that we want without necessarily having to go to what are the outlets, media outlets.
Yeah. And I don't want to trash the media, but
No, I mean,
yeah, we have so much capability
and
to find information and organize and do all that kind of stuff.
So this is why I do a podcast again.
Yeah.
Number of different reasons, but fundamentally is to give people like you a voice to speak to each other.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, you had Ella on the podcast.
Yes.
And you loved what she talked about. So
Yeah.
maybe just talk a little bit about that, because I think, what is it that you've heard on the podcast that has been useful to you?
So basically it was, she was talking about like before like kind of scaling, having the system thing. It was like one sentence that just like jumped out of me in red, flashing lights. But essentially, if you're building a business for scale, then you have to have the system that basically
supports that
scale, right? Because the system is essentially to make sure that you have an information loop, so that whatever decision you're making, exactly. So for instance, if you get investment and you want to invest in marketing, and you think, if I, for example, pay influencers, that will like really make the market explode. But then maybe there's data somewhere from your feedback that you've already tried with the influencer's perspective, but it's not really bringing sales. So if you don't have that information loop, then you kind of just end up making wrong decisions, not because you don't have the information, but because you have incomplete information.
Right.
And I think for Enda, kind of just looking at what's our potential for the future, and the realization that she was absolutely right, like what is that system, and how do we ensure that system is essentially built for us to grow,
to support your business.
Exactly. And I like to I watch a lot of nature channels, National Geographic, but I always get amazed when they do the under the sea or under the water. But when you look at a fish, it's not, the fish survives in its environment because it's built for it. Like the scales are not accidental, neither are the position of the fins. It's not accidental, neither are the gills. Like, it is a streamlined animal made to survive in that environment. So the same way, and that I would say that backbone is the system, that you basically have to create a system that allows the company to be as streamlined as possible to kind of get there. And that was something that I got from that podcast with Ella.
Awesome.
Word.
I'm glad you got something out of that, because again, it's also, teaching people, sharing experiences, so on and so forth. So, like, back to kind of, you guys came up with a plan for growth. Yeah. How do you come up with a plan for a shoe company? Where do you get a plan from?
I think it's a step by step. I think sometimes we underestimate our common sense, right? So I always say, like,
it's not as complicated as people think.
No, it's not. And there was one paper when I was doing accounting, it was called the audit, and audit had tons of notes, and everybody used to hate that unit because you have like tons of notes. And then one day I was just reading what the teacher was saying, and I was like, wait, some of these things are not, like, I don't have to study for 2 hours to know that, for example, if they're saying, how do you receive goods, for instance? I just have to sit and imagine, if I'm here and someone has been sent to receive goods, first of all, they'll come and I'll ask them, where are you from? Like, what's the documentation? I see it, what's the number of goods? They remove it, I count it, I check it.
It's just common sense stuff.
Exactly.
Like, how does a human being...
Exactly. It's like a step-by-step process. And once I figured that, I loved that subject. I was like, yeah, bring it on, because it's just thinking. And the same thing with shoes, and not to oversimplify the process, but it's essentially two people who don't know how to make shoes. What's the next step? Find someone.
Research.
Find someone who knows this, right? First of all, you get to know what shoes are, but the best thing is find someone who's already done this. And then that was the next step, like kind of just doing research and networking of who is the person who would fit our bill in terms of understanding why we want to do it here in Kenya, why it makes sense to have a Kenyan running brand. Why? Because to everybody else the idea was crazy, but then you kind of have to find someone who sees that, and that was the next step. We spent a huge amount of time finding that person, and then that person was very instrumental in kind of now just leading us
streamlining the process.
Exactly, like leading us to the next steps of
who was this guru? Shoe guru. Phil Knight of
no, but I did read his book. The first thing I did was get that book and read it
What do you
from
think
cover
about
to
the book?
cover. I think it's amazing. I think I need to meet him one day. And the funny thing is, I feel like it's so many years later, but from my experience, I feel like I'm going through some of the things he was going through. And it feels as though I keep on thinking, but this was like X years ago. How come it hasn't changed? So for me, that was a reflection of like Africa is still a little bit behind in terms of manufacturing processes and stuff like that. Because if he wrote that book and he kind of even retired from Nike, and now we are
going through the same
thing. It's just a different context, but it's the same thing. But time has passed, meaning technology has improved. The world has kind of moved on, so it shouldn't be so difficult. But somehow it is. So there's still challenges, but it's not impossible. It's kind of possible. Yeah.
Awesome. So you find this person. Who's the person again? Who was your
So
film
when
night?
we started out, we partnered with a design studio in New York called Bad House.
Okay.
And that way it was easier because I was in New York also then.
Oh, okay. Got
And then also, it was also just looking at who has the capability to produce a shoe that I can put on the shelf next to a global brand, and we are at the same level. So I think, of course, there's kind of this yearning of, can I just find a Kenyan who can do it? But
Where is that Kenyan?
We didn't. But it's not a question of where. I feel like Kenyans can do anything. If that industry existed,
If
like
it
now,
existed, right.
Like
So that's
now
a
we
point.
are finding people who have that capability and just basically trying to connect them with the designer and put that talent out there.
So when you say, what do you need? Somebody who can do what specifically?
So, for instance, the drawings are very intricate. So, like making sure, so think of it this way: you have a guy who speaks English communicating to a guy who doesn't speak English. The only thing they understand is the diagram, right? So, the guy who's like directly looking at the thing in China needs to understand what this guy is saying. So, it's essentially like math and vectors and like saying, okay, this is this distance to that distance.
Got it.
So, how do you do that? How do you get like a 3D model before you kind of go into the actual printing? So it has to be someone who is also aware of 3D printing, but from a footwear perspective. And then just how do you find someone who, for instance, can tell like that this EVA is like the plastic that makes the sole. So there's a certain density, there's a certain tensile strength, like it's not just a shoe,
there's
like,
physics in this
exactly
game.
So you also need someone who understands, so that again, as I said, people don't speak the same language. How does he produce something that he wants, you know? So when they're talking about this is a maybe 53 durometer EVA, and you're like, what is that? Like they need to understand that. So it's very skilled.
Okay, so I would imagine there's a shoe building ecosystem where people speak the same language, durometers and EVA. And
Yeah,
that
but the
stuff.
guy in China knows it in Chinese.
Got it. So,
Yeah.
so there's a language barrier there.
Yeah, there is, but it's basically how does because ultimately it's the paperwork that everybody understands regardless of what they're doing. So you have to be very specific in terms of the drawings.
So how did you overcome the language barrier in these cases? Did you find a translator?
Yeah, so basically the guys who we are working with in terms of design are people who've been making shoes for decades. So they already have their network. So it was easier to slide into those networks.
What they've already built already.
Exactly, than us trying to recreate the wheel.
So let me ask you a question. So you and
Weldon.
Weldon's a good dude, and thanks to him for setting us up on this podcast. I think he's a wonderful gentleman. So you guys come up with this plan. The first thing is to kind of find the person and find the organizations that can help you.
Yeah.
That way of thinking, right? Do you think it's non-obvious? It might be obvious to educated people, expose people, right?
Yeah.
But it's not necessary. I guess my question is, do you think the average person who in Nairobi who thought about building a shoe would have taken that path to find unique information, domain-specific information? Do you just think about the average person? I mean,
I don't know what average means, you know. Like seriously, I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer on their behalf. But as I said, sequence is common sense, I think.
But remember, people were reading that audit paper for.
Okay, yeah.
So
Fair
maybe
enough. Fair enough.
it's not common sense because it's I mean.
Yeah, I think it's a step-by-step product. But then if I step back, maybe I did learn process from Deloitte that I knew
process
maps. Like you basically, first thing you do, get into a business and say, okay, tell me from A to Z, what do you do? And then you're able to put it in a chart, and then I could say I would attribute it to that you're always thinking, what's the next step? What's the next step? What affects that decision?
And you actually sit down and map it out before you start doing anything.
You have to.
Right.
Yeah, that was
which is what I'm trying to get at, right? You know, it's a very, very important, subtle thing.
Yeah.
But it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Right?
But I have to say, entrepreneurship is hard because you're doing so many things.
True.
So,
so sometimes you don't even know whether you're coming or going, right?
Yeah, you don't know. And I think for me, my challenge, especially for this year, is to just take all that knowledge and like stop running and just take that knowledge and sit and implement it for Enda.
Yeah, it's not easy. My hats off to you guys. So you guys find the person who gives you an idea of the possibility space, right?
Yeah.
Is this even possible? How would you go about it?
Yeah.
And then you find what was it, an agency or what, this New York outfit?
Yeah. So we found them, just through a lot of emails and LinkedIn.
Okay.
Like, we're looking for this person and this person. People are actually super helpful.
Totally, yeah.
So, and even some of the people who, they still work for other companies, but we're still kind of good friends with them. Kind of like they support us from this
Which companies do they work for?
Yeah, they work for big brands.
No disclosure.
They were instrumental in just basically saying, I can't help you now, but talk to this guy, right? And
so what did they think about when you said you're trying to build a shoe company in Kenya?
I think everybody was like, why, like it's a eureka for everyone. Like Kenyans are so good at running, so why hasn't this
common sense
before?
like that?
So I feel like that was also a thing that really helped us like get people.
People wanted to get behind it.
Exactly. People were like, oh, this would be so amazing if it worked out. So that was cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the next? So you're doing your market research, evaluate whatever processing. What was the big milestone that you accomplished?
Prototype.
Okay.
That was it. Like you needed a product in hand.
Totally. You couldn't be talking about.
No. You needed a product in hand. So that was a big deal.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tell us about that. How did that come about?
So like once we basically had the team together, we had like a long day meeting and just kind of like put ideas on the wall. What does this look like? What do we want to achieve from a utility and aesthetic perspective, and just kind of putting all those ideas, then going back into, okay, this is version 1, it doesn't look nice, version 2, version 3, like we're incorporating so many things at once, and for me it was just like, okay, you have to make it so Kenyan, like it has to be so Kenyan that like you have to have those elements that really speak to why we're doing this, and then basically getting the factory in China to like do a prototype and just like make it happen and see how that looks like, and kind of just getting it, seeing it in a package, and like opening it. Yeah, that was like amazing.
How long did it take you between the first meeting with Weldon at the event
we met in 2015, January actually, towards the end of January 2015. We had a prototype, I would say late 2016, early 2017.
Okay, so about a year?
Yeah.
Roughly?
Yeah.
Wait, almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Almost 2 years.
Yeah. Actually, it's like a year and a half or something.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And then now you have the prototype. Now what do you do?
Now you need money to make more. Yeah. So then now it moves from, okay, at least you have something to show people and
totally.
the possibility.
Yes.
So then how do we make money to get to the next level?
Okay.
And kind of just looking at different options. Like for the traditional financials, they're like, wait, factory, where? No.
Not happening.
Like, yeah. So that was like a bit of a challenge because people kind of just look at the landscape. A lot of people in the US knew nothing about Africa other than Lion King. And then there was just this.
So you're raising money in the US essentially?
At that point I was there, so I was talking to everybody I was meeting, right? But we were also raising here. I wrote emails to some of my friends who I've met along the way, like this is what we're doing, would you guys be interested in like getting behind this now, and hopefully like it'll work out. So that was the next step. We did raise some money from friends and family to kind of just finish the whole prototyping phase, and then after that we were like, okay, we need big money, and we also needed to launch in a way that said, we're here to we're real, we're not prototyping. So that is how we ended up on Kickstarter, that we just figured out that was a nice way to get pre-orders, so kind of get the money in advance.
Right.
And then also a nice way to kind of get the conversation going about us, rather than us having a complete product line and nobody knows we exist.
Wow, so it killed two birds, eh?
Yes.
The Kickstarter play.
Yeah.
How did that work out?
Kickstarter preparation is exhausting, right? I always look back, because back then it was just Weldon and I. This time we just finished the second Kickstarter. We were a team of like 5. So when I look back, I'm like, I don't know how we didn't go crazy, you know? Like,
wow.
Yeah, because you're dealing with emails, you're dealing with outreach, you're dealing, at any one point, like my inbox to make me shiver, you know, like you're like you
What emails? From who? From orders?
From backers, you know, like people have genuine questions and people want answers, and people don't want you to answer like 3 days later. But you have like still so much going on. You still are kind of like talking to the designers, you're talking to the factory here in Kenya, you're trying to make all that work. You're just 2 people. Like it just felt like the day was not ending. Like it just felt like you're moving from one day to the next.
Right.
Like there was no night. It's just
Jesus
like
Christ.
you're moving from like one.
And how long did that last? Like that window? 30 days. Hopefully.
Like Kickstarter was like 30 days. The first one we did. This time we did 45. But the work actually happens a lot before
the prep.
Yeah, like the prep in terms of how do we get like media mention? How do we get people to back us up, like to commit to back us up? How do we manage their expectations? How do we make sure that they're ready with the like button to like order as soon as so there's just a whole lot
so
of
UI design of your campaign.
Exactly. Like you can't just put a thing on Kickstarter and hope and pray.
Something happens.
No.
Man, hats off to you guys for actually stepping out.
Strategy.
It takes as the Jewish word chutzpah.
Yeah,
right?
But it's also just we didn't have a choice, man. We were not going to get that money from anywhere, so we had to really.
Your backs were against the wall. It's either this or nothing. Let's get to it.
Exactly. Like nobody was going to give us that money, considering you know how people are always like, so what's your experience in this area? None. So they're like, do you want me to give you my money? Bye. So we understood our shortcomings, but we also understood the opportunity.
So what was the opportunity that you guys saw through your...
Opportunity was essentially pre-finance. Like Kickstarter crowd is aware that it's like a prototyping space. So people actually pre-order. They're not like ordering for immediate. So that gave us time to get money and get our act together.
But what was a bigger opportunity? So when you sat down with all these industry experts, right? In terms of mapping out what this could be.
Yeah.
What did success look like in those conversations?
Success looked like an entry into this market from a brand that is like the underdog, like from Africa. A, B is from the home of champions, and C is like the running industry is ripe for disruption. So this.
So what's possible? What's the possibility space here? Have you guys mapped that out and say this is our goal? We want to get here by this. If we get here, this will be awesome.
Exactly.
Like, what are you guys shooting for? So
I want someone in Siberia to be asked like, what kind of running shoe should I buy? And Enda should be on the top 3. And I say Siberia because in my mind it's like the farthest place ever.
maybe that's also Nike's aspiration, because maybe in Siberia people are not running.
That's still there. But I think it's to just kind of bring the simplicity and pure form of running back.
Size of company. What are we talking about here?
Oh, in terms of size, we definitely in all 7. Yeah, I don't know if people run in Antarctica, but we'll get there. We'll make snowshoes.
Kenyan snowshoes, that's awesome. The way global warming is going now, who knows? We might have snow here pretty soon.
Yeah, which is sad. That's there. But I would say success is kind of being a global international brand. Success is making it here in Kenya, which is hard, I have to admit. But I would want to make sure that we did our best to just make sure that it's coming here. Because the more we do it, the more money comes in, the more we export, the more, people make jobs, money comes in. So that we can be like the Germans with their pride of the precision on the car, and we can be the Italians with their fashion. But it's actually an industry that keeps the country going.
Yeah.
So for me, that is just that thing where we are not only, like we are a big player globally, but that is actually translated here where people need jobs and social
economic
impact.
development.
Yeah, and also just a company that cares about the environment. As we're talking about, Africa's history has been just extraction. So how about like extraction and growth, right?
How about no extraction?
Yeah, or no extraction at all, right? Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Because I think one of the funniest things, especially living outside Kenya, because here I think we have a lot of recycling mentality, just maybe it would be scarcity, like that blue band tin shall be
shall be in the fridge,
or shall be something. But then it always used to amaze me, always, that I would get a new plastic fork, eat with it and throw it. Like,
that's crazy.
That hurts.
That's
like,
crazy.
yeah, and I used to ask,
where is it going? Where is it coming from?
Yeah, I was like, this guy's drilled the freaking earth to get some petroleum product to make a fork that I used for like 5 minutes and I threw out, right?
Imagine.
So I do agree with you that extraction doesn't help, and it's also just because it has decimated our communities. And at a topic for another day is why I think DRC shall be the way it is for a long time. Because it's extractive and it profits a lot of people for that status quo to remain.
It's crazy. It's insane. So far, where you guys at right now, right? What stage are you? You post what's this thing called? Your second not GoFundMe, what's it called? Kickstarter, one of those things. So you pass your second Kickstarter.
Yes.
That's done.
Yeah, we've just done that one.
Have you raised money outside that?
No, we're actually doing that right now. So that's my job.
That's why you've got retired.
Yeah.
So where are you raising money from? Which markets?
Here. It's just, I think it's not about the market. It's more like the market matters, but it's just more of alignment with what we do. Because I do want someone who understands why we're doing what we are doing and why it makes a difference to make these shoes in Kenya.
Totally.
And why the brand is made in Kenya. Like, some people just don't get that. Right?
So how much are you raising?
In short, like, to be at a place where everything is good is, I would say, minimum 250K. That's like that, 25 million. Yeah, it pains me that there's a house that's more expensive than the capital we need, but someone is going to buy that. So I'd say 25 million kind of just gets us to that place where like everything is
25 million Kenya shillings.
Yeah,
this is an international podcast. Let's talk.
Yes.
So then let's
250K would like really get us to a good place in terms of just the system running, like making sure there's no stockouts, making sure that we are looking at product development and stuff like that. But if I stretch it, I'd say like 350 just basically gets us to like that point.
You know what I'm disappointed? I should have told you this. You should have brought your shoe.
Yeah.
So
usually I carry them. It's because I had somewhere I was last night and it disoriented me because I woke up late and so.
Man, I'm such a big fan of what you guys are doing, you and Weldon, and I want to see this be successful.
And the Enda team. I love my team.
Talk about the team, right?
Yeah, I feel like I've been in different places, worked in a lot of places, and I just feel like I love this team. Like this team it's not just about if they were looking for better pay, they would go, but it's just like the understanding that we are building something for the future and that we basically just need to put 110%. And sometimes I speak to my people and I feel like they are the CEO and not me,
Awesome.
like
what did you find is such amazing? The thing is, there's so many amazing, there's so much talent.
It's true. I always go back to corruption and nepotism, which is just killing us, right?
But there's so much desire.
Exactly. And I would always say finding that person who essentially is giving the 110%, right?
It's all in.
Yeah. So we were actually very lucky to find this company, which we just found in some place where we were. It was actually a competition and they were among it. So the company is called Yusudi, and I wasn't going to pitch for them or anything, but literally that's like where we got our stuff. So Yusudi trains.
They're over here on Gong Road, right?
Yeah, they're somewhere here. They take guys and they train them, and then they hook them up with internships, and then so for a startup, internships made sense for us because we were just at that point not at a position to pay someone a salary. So we basically started with the internships, but it allows you to kind of get to know who this person is. Yusudi has already kind of done the pre-selection, so you're not like
doing it for yourself.
Yeah, you're not doing it for yourself. And then I think you kind of just get really hungry young people who want to do something. And what I loved about that was that it was so blind. Like it wasn't like I like references. Don't take me wrong. Like references got us great people for the team, but I think especially here in Kenya, I like working with people who want to work. Like they want to work. It's not like their mom or dad send them here and they're like, yeah, I need to go for lunch. Not that going for lunch is a bad thing, but it's just the attitude.
They're hungry.
Yeah, that's it. And I feel like sometimes I'm like, these guys are the CEOs of the company because the way they would be like, yeah, it's time to go for that event. I'm like, I'm so tired. And they're like, no, we have to go. You know, as in I'm like, I love this. Like,
how big is your team?
Right now we are 5 people. Weldon, myself, Eva, she does sales and marketing, Ralph does sales, David does accounting.
I love it, man. You know, we should have a team lunch because there's 7 of us, right? Myself and 6 of the most amazing up and coming. I don't want to call them interns anymore. They're professionals.
Yeah,
and,
they are.
Yeah, and I've been very lucky. I feel the same way like you do.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep saying, man, there's just, you and I know there's depth of talent, depth of desire, depth of potential.
It's opportunity.
It is the opportunity.
Yeah, it's the opportunity.
And so that's great. So I guess as we start to wrap up over here is, I guess, what would you say would be your biggest challenges as you start since you started this journey?
I'd say the biggest challenge is I don't want to like go back to funding because I always feel like sometimes
if it's funding, it's funding.
Yeah, it is funding, but you know what we're talking about systems. Like you might say just funding is a challenge. You get the money and it all goes out.
That's true.
Right?
That's a very, very important point because that's very important because what you also see is people default to funding as the answer to all things.
Yeah,
and it's not.
No.
Yeah.
So it's just. Like building a brand, like shoes are a brand. Like it's just all about brand. Like rip one logo, put on another one.
Right.
Like there's an element of technology, but a lot of shoes is about branding. So kind of putting ourselves out there, I still feel like we haven't flexed enough. Like there's still people who I meet who have never heard of our brand, and I'm always like, that means we have that opportunity where there's.
I think so, man.
Yeah.
I think there's a running culture in Kenya.
Yes.
Do they wear your shoes? Like, are your shoes out here like that?
Yeah, shoes are out here. I was just talking to someone who was like, "Oh, it's at an event, and now everybody's wearing Enda shoes." I was like, "Yeah."
Oh, that's first. Yeah. I know you guys have to kind of have this higher price point.
Yeah.
Maybe. Can I say that? Okay.
Yes. So by all means.
Right, because you got to target elite. No, I mean like the West kind of top runners.
It's also just the cost of setting this thing up.
Totally.
Right? It's,
totally.
I mean,
you
as
gotta
I
cover
said
those
before,
costs. Yeah. Unit economics are
not. And it's not like I'm in a position where I'm saying like, oh, I'm boiling. Yeah.
So you got to start at that higher price point. And then,
I mean, it's
do you
just,
ever come down?
Just setting down, like setting up. Yeah, we're still setting up. We're like way far from being 100% made in Kenya. But one of the things that I say is kind of like from a running market perspective, we're actually fairly priced. Like the category where, for example, the 10 is you get shoes from like $80 to $250. So we're actually at the bottom end of the spectrum. But we also do recognize that a lot of Kenyans can't afford that yet. And one of the things we're looking at is basically using locally available technology and materials to create something that is going to also speak to the market.
I wouldn't be surprised if a few years down the road you guys are the harbinger or the canary in the coal mine that creates a shoe industry, a shoe factory kind of industry, right? Yeah. You could easily go into that direction because you could learn what those people are doing in China, and labor is increasing cost in China.
That's what we're doing actually. We did bring some of the team from China and the US to go down to the factory. They spent time with the team.
There you go.
Like showing them like this is how. So for example, if you remove the insole, there's something called a strobel stitch where you're stitching them upper and the insole together.
Right.
That was done in China, now it's done here.
Nice.
Shoelaces done in China, now they're being done here. So it's
so
like
it's slowly but surely moving towards fully manufactured, made.
Exactly, fully made in Kenya. That means more jobs, and also from a supply chain perspective, the more we can control that, the more we can lessen the time it takes to reorder, which makes better business.
So the biggest challenge has been what?
I say financing, because we're in a marketing industry.
You're in a brand building space.
So brand building is not
very expensive.
Yeah, it's not just Facebook ads.
Yeah.
It's endorsements.
Have you met Kipchoge by any chance?
No, but I'm sure I will. Yeah, Weldon has though.
He has? Wow, okay.
He has. I haven't met him, but I'm sure I will.
I'll be stalking that
always
all day. He's such an amazing ambassador for what
and he's also
Africa
very humble.
is. Amazing dude, man.
Yeah.
Huge fan.
But the thing I've learned, like hanging out with athletes, is the way we're talking about opportunities. So many talented people, so little few slots. So my belief is that there's another, if not better, who's just out there and
waiting
we
to be
need to
discovered.
find them.
Yeah, you need to be the first to it. But
yeah,
I mean, Weldon and I have talked about the nuances and the challenges of outcompeting the big boys when it comes to.
Yeah, but you see, like all this stuff that's coming out now, and you find that there's like people who have really good contracts and there's people who have really crappy contracts.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of, and then also one thing that's a concern for the athletes is the shelf life. They understand that they have X number of years to make money for the rest of their lives.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a long time.
So they better make the right moves.
Exactly, and I think for us, our pitch is essentially long term. That we are not just. Let's use and as soon as you can perform, like how do we invest long term in athletes so that they know that they can always count on us. So I think that's our approach essentially of being a long term partner.
Interesting. I think what you're doing has so many interesting possibilities of how you can build your brand with different tactics and strategies. So it's so interesting. Lessons learned. What would you do different if you're starting all over again?
If I was to start all over again, less trust, more contracts.
Less trust, more contracts.
Yeah, it's nothing personal.
Talk about this.
I would just say.
Is that towards more local or international or
both?
Everywhere?
Anyone you're dealing with, if money is involved, put it in a contract, right? I think, I have a very happy, trusting personality, which I've just come to learn to shove it when I'm doing business. But it's also just, I think whenever there's a possibility to work together, there's so much excitement and euphoria that it kind of like...
The devil is in the detail.
The devil is in the detail. Like, you have to make sure that we agree and then let's put it in writing. When you put it in writing, there's always a different perspective.
Totally.
Yeah, and considering that I'm a lawyer, sometimes I'm like, really?
How could I make this mistake?
Yeah, but sometimes we're human, So I would say paperwork. Like, if it's not written, it's not done.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so the future of Enda, I think you've talked a little bit about this. You want the guy in Siberia saying Enda is one of my top 3 running shoes.
Yeah, I mean, also from an economic perspective, kind of like
Impact.
Really creating value. The social impact for us we measure in terms of amount of money that's going into wages. We have a community giving program, which is essentially 2% of our revenues go into this fund that is invested in the community, kind of seeing more. That was actually very fulfilling. It remains, after seeing the prototype, like the community giving is like my second high, like just going to Korogosho, seeing the kids. And again, opportunity, I sometimes hate this country. I'm like, how can one part be so rich and another part be so desperate?
It's a global problem.
Yeah, but we can do
late
better.
Stage capitalism. We can do better. My thinking is
are people like.
I agree with you, and that's what we got to do. But I think it's a larger systemic one. Of course, we have different nuances here, like we talked about, right? I don't know. My hope is that maybe capitalism has one more evolution around it where it can democratize.
The only problem
well-being.
about evolution is that it's violent, in my opinion. It's like ultimately it comes to survival for the fittest.
But but here's what I'm saying. That is based on the frameworks that we have right now to understand the world. There could be a whole other paradigm we can't see. You have to leave room for that.
That's true. But I think it's just kind of seeing the world space right now and what makes sense, not making sense. And what's not making sense, and you're like, how could people think like this?
Like, especially the global warming thing.
Exactly.
It's so crazy.
It is. But then again, step back and look at Africa. Karl Marx, I think, is the one who was basically talking about how the image for the developing country, like the developing countries, when they see the image of development, they see the path the West has taken. And that path is self-destructive.
Yeah, totally.
So
it's unsustainable.
It's the same thing we're talking about manufacturing. It's extractive, right? So, but how else are we going to develop Like, what is that alternative path? And then you will say, oh yeah, let's invest in solar and all this kind of stuff. These are still new technologies that need a lot of money. Keep in mind, we still don't have that money. So I don't know, sometimes I think about all these things and I'm like, how is it going to work out?
How is it going to work out?
Yeah.
You know what? I'll put it this way, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know the world doesn't need humans, eh?
No, in fact, who said it?
The world is good without us out here.
Kumi Naidu, he said that the earth is going to be fine.
Oh, the earth is chilling.
We're all just gonna die.
The earth is totally okay.
The earth will have time to just recover over hundreds of years from
what's that Will Smith
destruction.
movie? The Will Smith movie that the one where he was the only guy left, and then there were all these funny creatures. Anyway, there was a movie with Will Smith.
The one
did.
for Netflix?
No. That one
okay.
before that. But anyway, let's end this with a more hopeful tone,
Yes.
right? Somehow we make it. But
we will.
So, future of Silicon Savannah. What do you think? What do you think is possible in Nairobi, man? Based on what you see, Vision 2030. What's your Vision 2030?
Oh my gosh! Like, I think there's so much possibility in just Africa as a whole, because from my perspective, what has been painted as developed vis-a-vis developing is just order, right? And I feel like order,
structure.
Yeah, it's just something we can do. Like, it's not out of this world. Like, if you go, for example, to the UK, it's just neat houses, like development is something we can achieve.
That's possible,
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we have the resources to achieve it. We just do a lot.
What is the number one resource you think?
People.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you. Final tips for anybody who's thinking about, who's in the entrepreneurial journey. What are the final tips you would parting shots for?
Yes, you can. I always say, yes, you can. Julius Yego, first Kenyan to ever win a Commonwealth gold medal in a field event. Yes, you can. The guy did it with YouTube. Of course, he got help at the end, but he did it.
Right.
Yeah. So whenever I think about what is available here, I'm like, you can. It doesn't mean it's an easy journey. Don't take it. It just means put yourself on that path. And I believe, it's my honest belief based on my experience, if you put yourself in a path, you will, by virtue of serendipity or something, you will meet people who will help you along that path.
Awesome.
But you just have to put yourself in that path.
Get going.
Yeah, because that will take you to places you wouldn't have found.
Is that your just do it? Yes, you can.
I think I would say that. Like, I would say for me, it's always I have a very.
You should do it. Yes, you can.
Yeah, I have this awareness of life. I don't know why. I think I am very aware of my 24 hours. I don't know why. Like, I'm always aware that I might not be here tomorrow, so I have today. So I need to extract the maximum that I can for today. And if tomorrow comes, awesome. If it doesn't come, I'll be
good.
God.
And give it my best.
Yeah.
So do you have a tagline or no for Enda?
For Enda is go, Like,
awesome.
It's literally the meaning of Enda, go. Like,
okay. Why am I? Imagine. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Enda in my mind was that.
Yeah, it's good. It means we've created a brand that you're even forgetting the meaning of the word.
Jesus Christ. I was saying Enda in English.
Yeah. That's funny.
Go, I love it.
Yeah, just
awesome.
go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
it's been an awesome conversation.
Good conversation, I agree.
We'll probably have you guys back
again.
Awesome. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Yeah.